We begin now at the top of Daf Beis Amud Aleph in Meseches Zevachim. This is Zevachim Daf Tube. The Mishnah says, Kol hazvachim shenizbechu shelo lishman, all sacrifices that are slaughtered not lishman, kesherim, they are kosher, ela shelo alu lebailim l'shem chova, however they don't count towards the owner's obligations. And Rashi explains, Kol hazvachim shenizbechu shelo lishman, it means, for example, shenishchat ola l'shem shlamim. Let's say a carbon ola is slaughtered, but it's slaughtered with the intention that it's a shlamim, the wrong intention. So ksherim means to say it's kosher, lizrok daman ulhaktere murehem. You can offer that carbon, you can still throw the blood, you can still offer the emurim on the mizbeach, v'lechol esanechol, and if it's a kind of carbon that's eaten, it can be eaten. Afal pisha mitzvosan l'shochtan l'shman, even though the mitzvah really is to slaughter it lishma for the sake of that particular carbon, k'di yalef v'gemara, like the Gemara will learn out, but nevertheless, if it was done shalo lishma, again, it's going to be kosher. However, ela shelo alu, it's not going to count for the owner's obligation. V'tzarich l'havi acher l'chovaso. If he has an obligation to bring this particular carbon, he will need to bring another carbon. O l'nidro, or let's say he made a neder, he made an oath that he was going to bring a carbon, he's going to need to bring another one. V'yishchetenu l'shma, and he'll have to slaughter that one. L'shma, he'll have to slaughter that one for the sake of that particular carbon. So that is the general rule. Again, if it is shelo l'shman, it is kosher, but it's lo alu l'bailim l'shem chova, it doesn't count for the obligation of the owner. And the Mishnah continues, chutz min ha-pesach v'ha-chatos, with the exception of a carbon pesach and a carbon chatos. And the Mishnah clarifies, ha-pesach bismano, when we're referring to a carbon pesach, we're talking about a carbon pesach that's brought in its proper time. We'll see Rashi in a moment. V'ha-chatos b'chol zman, and when we refer to a chatos over here in the Mishnah, that's any time the chatos is brought. And Rashi explains, chutz min ha-pesach v'ha-chatos, with the exception of carbon pesach and chatos, shehein psulin legamri, those are completely disqualified. V'yolef la b'gemara, that's going to be learned out in the Gemara. In other words, the other kinds of carbonos are kosher, but they don't count for the owner's obligation. But the carbon pesach and the carbon chatos, they are completely disqualified. And ha-pesach bismana, when we talk about carbon pesach, we mean in its proper time, pasul shelo lishmo. That's when it's disqualified if it's shelo lishmo, if it's not brought for its sake as that carbon. Calls man shchita, so during the time that it's supposed to be slaughtered. Dahainu mechatzos hayom shel erev pesach ad ho'erev. The time for slaughtering the carbon pesach is from chatzos hayom of erev pesach, from midday of erev pesach until the evening. Aval kodem lochein v'achar mikan. But let's say before that time or after that time, kaim ulon, the halacha is the pesach b'shar yemos hashana shlomimhu, that actually any carbon pesach brought at not the proper time is just considered a carbon shlomim. V'chol dino keshlamim, and it would actually just follow all the laws of a shlomim. Ve'amrina le'el, and we just said earlier, deshar zvachim kasherin shelo lishman, that other karbanos, shlomim included, are kosher when it's shelo lishman. Uve'gemara yalef la mikroi. The Gemara is going to learn that out from Psukim. That's why it's specifically by Pesach Bismano that it is completely disqualified. And the Mishnah continues, Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Eliezer says, Af ha'asham, it is also true by the asham, just like the carbon chatos and Pesach Bismano are completely disqualified if they're not lishma, so too the carbon asham is completely disqualified if it's not lishma. And the Gemara continues and explains, Ha-Pesach Bismano v'ha-chatos v'asham b'chol zman. Again, the carbon Pesach in its proper time, and the chatos and the asham will be at any time. And Omer Rabbi Eliezer says, Ha-chatos ba'al chet, the chatos is brought for a sin, v'asham ba'al chet, and the carbon asham is also brought for a sin. Ma-chatos psula shelo lishma, just like a carbon chatos is disqualified if it's not brought lishma, afa asham pasal shelo lishmo, so to an asham is pasal if it is not brought lishmo. And the Mishnah continues, Yosi ben Choni Omer, Yosi ben Choni says, Hanishchotin l'shem Pesach u'l'shem chatos psulin. Let's say I have a carbon that's shelo lishma, but it's not just shelo lishma, it's specifically slaughtered as a carbon Pesach. It's specifically slaughtered as a chatos, then it actually is disqualified. Rashi explains, Hanishchotin l'shem Pesach, kol shar zvachim, all other karbonos, shenizbechu b'yud dalid b'nisan l'shem Pesach. Let's say it's the 14th of Nisan, and there was another carbon, let's say a carbon shlomim, or let's say it was a carbon ola, and you shechted it to be a carbon Pesach. O shenizbechu l'shem chatos b'chol zman, or let's say you shechted this other carbon, a shlomim, an ola, whatever it was, as a chatos at any time during the year. Psulin, those are completely disqualified. Ki hechi de'inu psulin l'shem acherim. And the idea is just like a chatos and a carbon Pesach in its time time, if it's shalol lishma, it's totally disqualified. So to other karbanos, if you do them as a Pesach Bizmano, the shalol lishma is specifically Pesach Bizmano, or the shalol lishma is specifically a carbon chatas, then it's going to be disqualified. Uv Gemara yolaf taima da acherim l'shem Pesach bebraisa, and the Gemara will learn this out again in a braisa. And the Mishnah continues, Shimon Achi Azariah Omer, Shimon the brother of Azariah says, Shachton L'Shem Gavoa, let's say the L'Shem Gavoa Mehen, let's say a person slaughters the carbon for something that is of greater sanctity, a type of carbon that's of higher sanctity, as the Mishnah will continue and explain. Ksherin, that's still kosher. But L'Shem Namuch Mehen, but if you slaughter the carbon for a type of carbon that's a lower level, a lower status of Kedusha, Psulin, that is disqualified. Ketzad, how so? Kodshe Kodshim Sheshachton L'Shem Kodshim Kalam. Let's say you have kachim kachim, for example, like a carbanola that is slaughtered as if it was a kachim kalam, a lighter kind of carbon like a shlomim, psulin. That's going to be disqualified because that is a lower level of kedusha. But kachim kalam sheshachtan l'shem kachim kachim. If you have kachim kalam, let's say again a shlomim that was slaughtered to be an ola, that's a higher level of kedusha. Ksherin, that would be kosher. Ha-bechor v'ha-meiser, and another example, let's say you have bechor and meiser, sheshachtan l'shem shlamim, if they're slaughtered for shlamim, which is a higher level, ksherin, that is kosher. Shlamim sheshachtan l'shem bechor l'shem meiser, but if it's a shlamim slaughtered as a bechor meiser, psulin, that is disqualified. And Rashi explains, Shimon Achi Azariah, Shimon the brother of Azariah, Al Shem Azariah Asak Beprakmatya. The reason why Shimon is referred to as the brother of Azariah is because Azariah worked in business, Vesipek Tzorche Shimon Achiv, and he was the one that gave a parnasa, that gave sustenance to his brother Shimon, B'shasha Yosek B'Torah, and Shimon would learn Torah. Vehisnu Beinei, and they made a condition between them, She'echelek Azariah, B'schar Talmud Shal Shimon, that Azariah would get some of the reward of the learning of Shimon, and that's why he's referred to as Shimon Achi Azariah. And Rashi continues, Shachtan l'shar zvachim l'shem gavoa mehen, if a person slaughters other karbanos for something that's higher than them, ksherin, it is kosher k'dim mefarash v'yazal, as the Mishnah will explain. And Rashi notes, the Gemara will learn this out, mefarish l'hai ksherin, and the Gemara will explain, what does it mean it's kosher? Iksherin v'alu ka'amar, does it mean to say that it's kosher and also it counts for the obligation of the owner, uvitarti pligi, then there'd be an argument over here with regards to two issues, iksherin v'lo alu ka'amar, or maybe it means to say that it's kosher, but it doesn't count for the owners as their obligation, and so if that were the case, then they're arguing, again in a situation where the person slaughters it for something of higher or lower level kedusha. And Rashi continues, L'shem namuch mehen psulin legamri. Now, if it's for something that's of lower level of kedusha, it's completely disqualified. And Rashi notes, Bechor u'meiser behema nemuchen mishlamim. Bechor and meiser behema are a lower level than shlamim. K'damrinam beperak al atadar, like we're going to say later on. In Parakal Atadim, B'nei Shlamim, Tu'unin Matan Arba, Smichu, Nesachim, Tunufas, Chazav V'Shok. There are various requirements by Shlamim that don't apply by Bechor and Meiser Behema, and that's why Shlamim is considered a higher level. And the Gemara says, Lama li lemisna ela shelo ala. Why does the Mishnah say, except that they don't count for the obligation of the owner? Listen, v'lo alu l'baylam l'shem chova, simply say, they don't count for the obligation of the owner. Rashi explains the question, Lama li lemisni ela laharich b'lashona. Why does the Mishnah have to be so lengthy with its language? Listen, v'lo alu l'baylam, simply say, it doesn't count for the owner's obligation. Lashon Ketzara, use a shorter language, kedekayim alon, like we've established in Meseches Psachim. Liolam yashana adam l'talmido, derech Ketzara, a person should always teach a student in a shorter manner, and so therefore, what is the meaning of the extra language that the Mishnah uses? And the Gemara continues and says, "Hakamash malon," it comes to teach us, lebailim hu delo alu l'shem chov. It doesn't count for the owners for their obligation. Avol bikdusha sayu kaimi, but the kedusha, the holiness of this carbon remains. V'aser l'shanuye behu, and it would be aser, be forbidden to change anything. And Rashi explains, Hakamash Malan Atisha Ein Bohem Shum Yerida Ela Osa Levado. There's nothing that is considered lower about this carbon except for the fact that it doesn't count for the owner's obligation. Aval Bikdusha Sayu Kaimi, the Kedusha remains. V'asar L'Shanuya Behu, you can't make any other changes. You can't make, Rashi says, Sushinuya Achrina. You can't make any further changes. Lavod Achas Mishar Avodos L'Chatchila Shalol L'Shma. To do some of the other avodos. There's other avodos of the carbon that follow the slaughtering of the carbon, and so those avodos of the carbon korban lechatchila, they should not be done shelo lishma, they should be done properly. Miyu amavar v'shina kosher. Now, nevertheless, if the person did go ahead and change something, it still would be kosher. And the Gemara continues, Uchid Rava, and this follows Rava, the Yamar Rava, because Rava says, Ola shashachta shelo lishma, if you have a korban ola that was slaughtered, not lishma, asur lizrok dama shelo lishma, it's forbidden to do the zrikas hadam, to do the sprinkling of the blood shelo lishma. Just because you did the first part shelo lishma does not mean you should do a subsequent part shelo lishma. And the Gemara continues, Iboy Yisei Masvara, Iboy Yisei Makra. If you want, I could say that it's logical to say this, and if you want, we could bring a pasuk. Iboy Yisei Masvara, if you want, we could say that it's logical, Mishum Deshani Ba Kol Hani Lishni Ba, because the person changed one thing, therefore you should make all these other changes. Kol Hani Lishni Ba V'Lezel, you should continue to make changes. And Iboy Yisei Makra, if you want, we could bring a pasuk. Motzos Vasecha Tishmor V'Yosisa Kasher Nadarta LaHashem Elokecha Nedava. The pasuk here refers to various kinds of oaths, Nedarim and Nedavos. And so the Gemara says, Hi Nedava, this Nedava that's mentioned in the pasuk, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Beis Amud Beis.